My name is Caitlin Durkin. I'm the manager for network partner relationships at Best Friends Animal Society. And I am just here to get things started, do a little bit of the boring stuff before we turn things over to our excellent moderator and panelists. This is accessibility in animal welfare, increased life saving with access for all. All right, so a little bit of housekeeping notes. There are two ways to communicate in the Zoom room. It's a little bit weird, but it really helps us. So the first is through the Q&A function. This is where you can put in questions that you have for our panelists. If you put those questions there, it helps us see them really quickly. It lets me pull out a report. So even if we don't get the chance to answer your questions, we can inform other Best Friends Network marketing in the future with that. So please put any questions there. You also have the chat. The chat is the best place that you can go to share reactions to what our panelists are saying, or maybe share something that you've done at your organization that can increase accessibility as well. So two things there. We are also going to be asking for your feedback on this webinar. So in the last minute, I'm going to pop back on here and ask you to fill out a 1-question survey that'll pop up on your Zoom screen. It's just a 1 to 5, how we did. I feel so grateful to have so many people working in animal welfare in this room. I know that all of you have people and pets who are begging for your attention right now. So we take very seriously the value of your time, and we want to make sure that we're using it well. So that's why we ask you to use that survey to make sure we direct this in the future. We will also make the webinar recording available in about 3 business days. That'll go out in a Best Friends Network newsletter. It will also be posted on the website. So there you go. Share it with anybody you like. And then finally, to clarify that Best Friends is not providing any legal advice here, I expect some of our panelists will speak to their experiences with ADA and FMLA, and we're very grateful for them to doing that. Just have to separate the line that this is not Best Friends giving legal advice, and so you just need to look into your own experiences. With that, I am going to introduce our moderator, who will then introduce our panelists. Samuel White is the Manager of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Best Friends Animal Society, and we are absolutely delighted to have him here. Sam, do you want to take it over?
Thank you so much, Caitlin. I'm excited to be here, excited about this opportunity and this very important conversation, excited about these amazing panelists that we have with us today. And so I want to introduce them. We have Alison Fechino, Chief Executive Officer of Norfolk Animal Care Center. Alison has worked in shelters of many shapes and sizes, from small nonprofits to mid-sized municipal shelters. Her career passions include strengthening the connection between communities and animal shelters, supporting the human-animal bond, and exploring the overlap between human and animal services. Alison's hobbies include playing not remotely competitive kickball, hosting a run club for slowpokes, and pretending to have more than 2 hobbies when asked. We also have Heather Miller. Heather is the Development and Communications Director at Cat Adoption Team. That's a private nonprofit animal shelter located in Sherwood, Oregon. A lifelong animal lover, Heather started in animal welfare work as a volunteer at Paw Chicago. In 2011, she moved to the Portland metro area and joined the staff team at CAT. And in her role, Heather manages fundraising and communications efforts in support of all CAT's programs and services for cats and people. She also worked closely with other staff and board members on strategic planning and initiatives, including DEIB-related projects. She believes authenticity, integrity, gratitude, and empathy and fun are the keys to creating meaningful impact at work and in life. Heather has 20 years of corporate and nonprofit communications experience and over a decade of experience in fundraising. We also have Reagan Daughtry. Reagan is a dedicated animal welfare professional with a passion for helping animals in need. Beginning her journey as a volunteer and intern at Cameron Park Zoo in Waco, Reagan honed her skills and knowledge of animal behavior and care. And before joining Best Friends, Reagan served as the rescue coordinator at a shelter in Waco, Texas, where she demonstrated her versatility and expertise in all aspects of animal welfare. Reagan joined Best Friends as a shelter partnership coordinator for Houston and is now a national operations support specialist with the Best Friends National Operations Support Team. Driven by her passion for the cause, Reagan made the move to Houston in June for the opportunity to work with Best Friends, which has proven to be a truly amazing adventure so far. We also have Kristan McCormick. Kristan began her career in animal welfare nearly 15 years ago as an intern and volunteer for Best Friends, focusing on animal care, emergency response work, and large-scale events. She went on to work at different organizations, gaining experience in adoption, transport, and volunteer programs, shelter operations, and a community spay-neuter clinic. Kristan has been with Best Friends for more than 9 years as one of the founding team members to establish the local foster and adoption program in New York, and has supported the opening of the Best Friends New York Center Lifesaving Center. And from there, Kristan went on to work with various national programs for Best Friends, such as Embed program, mentorship programs, Best Friends Network, and most recently, she was part of the Shelter Collaborative team. Kristan now works as a senior manager for regional programs for the East Regional team, focusing on engaging with shelters to provide resources to increase life saving. Finally, we have Joyce Quinzel, Senior Analyst for DXC Operations at Best Friends Animal Society. Joyce's affiliation with Best Friends Animal Society started over 10 years ago when she became a volunteer at the Salt Lake City Life Saving Center. Joyce's volunteer experience with Best Friends Animal Society includes cleaning, sanitizing, providing dog care, walks, and events such as super adoption and Stretch Mud. Joyce joined Best Friends Animal Society as a staff member 8 years ago. And initially, Joyce started out in the visitor experience department supporting the online store. Today, Joyce is part of the development operations team as a senior analyst, providing data insights and operational support for the development team, primarily for the merchandise team, visitor experience team, and advocacy team. Joyce is currently living in New Jersey with her husband, Jason, and their cat, Lincoln. So we welcome this amazing slate of panelists as we begin this very important conversation. So I just want to give our panelists just a quick second to just unmute themselves and kind of greet all of our participants. And so we're going to go the way it's lined up on my screen: Sarah Miller, Alison, Fechino, Joyce Quinzel, Kristan McCormick, and then Reagan, Daughtry. So just go ahead and unmute, give us a quick hello, and just what you're excited about this panel discussion. What excites you most about this discussion? Go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, Sam. Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Miller. I'm so honored and excited to be here in this conversation with these other incredible panelists. I'm really excited. I think that the animal welfare field, our industry as a whole, has been a little slow moving at times. And so I love that we're having these types of conversations and starting to work in a more sort of adopters welcome ideology, and realizing that we can help more people and more pets, or we can help more pets when we are helping more people. And I think this is a great step in that direction. So I'm excited to have the conversation today.
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
Hi, folks. I'm Alison Fechino. I'm from Norfolk, Virginia. I would 100% echo what Heather mentioned. I'm really looking forward to learning from my fellow panelists. When we first started looking into how we could make shelters more accessible, we didn't find a whole lot of information that was specifically catered to the animal welfare field. And so getting the opportunity to be in a group of folks who have explored this topic very specifically is one that I'm really excited about as well.
My name is Joyce, and I'm really excited to be a part of this panelist group. My hope is that folks will feel a part of the group, and if there is someone out there who might feel alone, that this brings them some comfort that we are not alone, and understanding that there's such a of course, I looked up some stats beforehand, but it's estimated that 16% of the human population has needs accommodations or has a disability, and that's over 60 million people in the United States. So I was thinking that of that group, there are a lot of folks that probably, have a passion and love animals and want to be connected with pets.
Thank you, Joyce.
Hello, I'm Kristan McCormick. I'm based out of New York. I'm really excited to be here, just that there's more awareness around disability in general. I think there's more conversations happening in all different fields, but I'm especially excited to be talking about it in an animal welfare perspective. I think I read something that really resonated with me, that the disability demographic is a demographic that anyone can become a part of at any time. So that opened my eyes to kind of think about things a lot differently than I had previously, now that I'm experiencing disability.
Thank you, Kristan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Reagan. I am so excited to see all of the Houston people. I see a whole bunch of people from Texas, and it's just making me really excited to see all the Houston and Texas people. I think what I'm really excited about is this culture of talking about it, quote unquote, talking about it is fairly new, and it's fairly, especially for a lot of people like myself who do have, a disability or might potentially need accommodations. And we're kind of, I think in animal welfare, we're already spearheading so many new things and so many progressive changes that it's kind of great to see us jumping in and joining to the talk of accessibility and, providing a way for us to include everyone in our community.
Thank you, Reagan. And, I think that's a great segue to one of the first questions that I want to ask Reagan, because you talked about talking about it. And so this first question is, how do you communicate about accessibility? How do you make sure community members know that they will be welcome and made comfortable? So this is about communication. How do we talk about it? How do we communicate about accessibility?
Yeah, so it's rarely, I think it's important for everybody to remember like a key thing. If you walk away with anything, one thing that you can add to your list is that not everyone is open to talking about their disabilities. So you cannot expect everyone. I personally am extremely open about it. I am willing to talk about it, to have a conversation about it, but not everybody is. So aiming it, I think one way to communicate is maybe the big thing for animal welfare is our promotions. We promote everything. We promote everything everywhere. And if you're going to take on the goal of making your shelter organization more inclusive and accessible, add that to your promotions, add those talks, those essentially the welcome wagon to your promotions, to your text, to any way that you communicate with people externally, to let them know that this is the work that you want to do, this is the goal that you have, and that you're open to receiving feedback and you're open to a dialogue with them about whether they want to tell you about their disability or just ask questions. I think organizations can open themselves up to be ready to answer, to receive feedback, and to listen to their community.
Thank you so much, Reagan. Anybody else want to jump in here on this question?
I can add something, just thinking about communications in general when it comes to representation in your social media, your marketing, all the photos that we love to take, making sure you have representative for folks that are disabled. I think it is really important and not something I see, I think, ever in animal welfare. For instance, I don't know if you shop at Target, sometimes they have, you know, ads on the wall and stuff, and they'll feature kids with mobility devices. I think that's something that's really cool. And I think that's something that isn't too common in animal welfare. So think about how you can incorporate, you know, those individuals that can represent the disabled community.
Thank you, Kristan. I think representation is so important when we talk about communicating about these things, for people to be able to see themselves. Actually communicates volumes by itself, right? Without actually saying anything, you're already communicating the importance of accessibility just by having the representation.
Right. And just showing that, you know, you're inclusive and including folks of all different demographics.
I would add to that it can be sometimes difficult to see within your own communications where you're not hitting the mark. I know I just had that experience where I got some feedback about our images on our website, and I'm like, oh no, I tried really hard to include that, and I went back and looked and like really did like a count 1, 2, 3, and went, yep, I missed that. It was hard for me to see because I was looking at it from a different perspective. So I think gathering perspectives is also really important when you're talking about communicating, and getting, you know, different eyeballs on your communications to help you find those spots where you're not getting it right, and to be willing to acknowledge that feedback. And sometimes you're getting it wrong. That's okay. Fix it.
Yeah, that's a very perceptive point, Heather. And I think I want to circle back to that in just a second, because I do have a question about feedback, and I'm going to want to know, you know, how you all are welcoming feedback. But before we get there, I saw a question in the chat that someone had about asking about each person's definition of accessibility. And so I want to combine that with another question, which is, why is it important for animal welfare professionals to think about accessibility? And in answering that question, give us your definition of accessibility.
I can kick that one off.
Okay.
In our perspective, it's really important to consider accessibility in animal sheltering because animals are for everyone. And in order to make it possible for folks to bring the best version of themselves to your organization and to be the best version of a pet owner that they can, services have to be accessible to them. So for us, accessibility is creating a space where folks can bring everything that they are and be the best version of who they are, because you've removed any barriers that may be in place to prevent them from doing so.
Thank you, Alison. Anybody? Go ahead, Joyce.
I'll build on that. For me, when I think about accessibility, I think about, I try to think of my experience and then how I can build on that and expand on that for other things. And so I think about, again, how important it is to be accessible so that folks feel comfortable and so that they're able to receive information. And so I think about whether it is offering text to speech options, or making sure that they're, you know, for people that they have access literally to enter the building and move freely around, and also being aware of different cultures and really being mindful to not use a disability or illness or anything of that matter as like an adjective, to treat people as humans and identify with them.
I can add to that. I think the more we push to be even more inclusive in our practices, you know, the bigger our circle of supporters grows. I'm a really big believer in that everyone deserves the opportunity to experience the human-animal bond. It's something that's so special and we all know of. So looking at potential barriers, Joyce recommended, whether it's like physical, is your facility or your event accessible mobility wise? Or do you have maybe some accommodations, some tools available for those that maybe can't walk through a really noisy or overstimulating shelter environment? Do you have like a plan for that? Thinking about those things so we can, make our shelters more accessible in our events. And then, someone mentioned our processes, and there's some barriers sometimes with foster and adoption processes. I think sometimes in our field, we may be quick to go to some assumptions or about capabilities when it comes to adoption. Like we think we know what people can handle and all of that, instead of having a conversation to learn more about that individual. So I think accessibility means to me, like people are having a conversation about asking me about my lived experiences, and then trusting me to be able to make decisions about what I can and can't do, whether it's my personal life, my work life, what animals I'm able to own, things like that.
Thank you, Kristan.
I'd like to piggyback on that because I had the same thought, was that I think when you don't consider the differences that others might have in, it could be their cognitive makeup, it could be how they communicate or their mobility needs, you're not really breaking down communication barriers, and you could be potentially reinforcing those barriers by not actively working to open those bridges. And I think if you imagine how many potential adopters or fosters, volunteers, donors, and even employees you could miss out on simply because they couldn't reach you, I think then it really truly shows the importance of making things accessible. And to me, my definition of accessibility is the ability for someone to do the same thing as the other people in the same room. So whether somebody might be in a wheelchair, they should be able to walk the kennels and view the dogs the same way as somebody who isn't in a wheelchair. Or if somebody who might be hearing impaired wants to have a conversation, just like this person over here, they might not conversate in the same way, but they should still be able to have a conversation.
Thank you, Reagan.
The through theme I'm hearing from my panelists is somewhat about, again, back to communication. For me, accessibility is that folks who are interested in your services, whether that's adoption services or any other type of service that your shelter has, can access those services. So that might mean that they are able to connect with you in whatever way is comfortable for them to connect, whether that's online, offline, written, verbal, all of these different ways that we communicate with each other, because that's how we're doing animal welfare. We're talking to people about adoptions. We're talking to them about donations. We're sharing information about spay neuter, all of these things to make that information that anyone can access, wherever they're coming from, whatever their lived experience. I think price is another important barrier that can be something that can stop things from being accessible. And so I think that financial resources is another piece of that puzzle. And it can feel very broad and maybe even overwhelming sometimes. But I don't think that doesn't mean to feel overwhelmed and to do nothing, or to feel like, well, I have to do all of this and do all of that. If you start somewhere, you can start opening those doors, and more doors will open. So for me, accessibility is particularly in animal welfare is making services something that everyone can reach and get to and be a part of.
And I love what you just said, Heather. If you start somewhere, and thinking about those words, I'm going to ask our panelists to kind of talk about, an example. Tell us when you have made or how you have made the animal shelter experience more accessible, welcoming, and comfortable for people of different abilities. So give us an example. I don't know, maybe as a team that you've worked on, you've coordinated, collaborated with some ideas, or you've been instrumental in actually creating that experience, whether it's, I think Kristan spoke about kind of like spaces that might be accommodating for neurodivergent people, or just how you navigate that. How have you created that space?
I can share some experiences of when I was volunteering at Salt Lake City as animal care with dogs, and I would train other volunteers on walking the dogs because we would walk the dogs out into the community. So it was important that we knew the dog's name, their information in case the animal got loose and we had to communicate that. And so I would give tips of things that would work for me. Like if I was concerned that I might not be able to recall the animal's name or their approximate age, that I would take a photo of their bio card so that I can refer to it if I needed to. The other thing is making sure that if someone had a workable radio, and really taking time to understand if there seems to be something that they might want extra assistance in a technique, or making a comfortable space to have a conversation where they might open up a little bit more about what they need.
Thank you, Joyce.
At Cat Adoption Team, we're working through a range of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And so a specific thing that I worked on with our team last year, which they're all ongoing projects, so it's definitely not a complete finished product, but we've been working on making our website more accessible for folks who might be accessing it either with a screen reader or with other accommodations. And this was something that actually a volunteer brought up to us as something where they had done some work in this arena, specifically about website accessibility, and just had glanced through some of our pages and realized that it wasn't as accessible and therefore not as welcoming as it could be. And so we worked on identifying some sort of high priority things that we could do to increase the accessibility on our website. And it is, like I said, it is an imperfect and project still in work, but it's something that was really meaningful to us, and kind of, we talked about feedback earlier, like taking that feedback and recognizing how important that is. So many people are online now and using that as the first way that they're getting connected with organizations, and that includes, animal welfare organizations. So if we are doing all of these things at our shelter to make it more accessible, our website's an extension of that. And so that's a project that we've been working on, that I've specifically been involved with.
Thank you, Heather.
I think we need to think about our internal teams too, like our own staff, and giving opportunities to, or potential staff who may be living with a disability, like maybe helping to identify reasonable accommodations for them, or helping them find the right role within your organization that helps their talents really come through and shine. I think, we can tap into a whole pool of people if we are more inclusive and we look at more resumes, and we try to include folks in those conversations a little bit more, and always work with your HR department on that.
Thank you, Kristan. So I want to circle back to the feedback, and I said I would come back to this. I think this is a great place to talk about it as we kind of explore the way that you all have implemented these experiences at your shelters, how have you welcomed and implemented feedback around accessibility? Who's a part of that conversation? And I want to actually lift up, as you think about that question, I want to lift up one that was asked in the Q&A. Michelle Gray says there seems to be a lot of opportunities to have people with disabilities help with volunteer experiences to get them involved. Any suggestions or helpful ideas for programs that have worked? Heather mentioned that some of the feedback and suggestions that came about and influenced that work was from a volunteer. So just want to know, how are you receiving and implementing feedback? And then what role really does volunteers and folks who actually may have disabilities or actually benefit from the accessibility actually play in that feedback?
I can take that one off. The experience that started our shelter management team looking at how accessible our shelter experiences were was between me and a friend of mine. Her daughter describes herself as autistic. I know that some folks identify differently as person with autism, but that's the language that she prefers. Came to the shelter and she was very overwhelmed by how loud it was, how bright it was, how many people were there, and she wasn't able to complete a visitation. So I said, hey, no big deal. You can just come back when we're closed because I'll be here. I've got the keys. I can let you in. And when we did that, she said, I don't think I could adopt a pet if I didn't know you because I never would have had this experience. And we were like, well, that doesn't seem right. So we started looking into how we could make a more sensory-friendly adoption experience. And the first thing that we identified was that we didn't really know anything about it at all. So we reached out to a couple of local organizations that serve individuals who are more sensitive to those kinds of experiences. We asked them what language we should use to describe the program, how we should set up the room, what we should include in the space, what things we wouldn't ever think to consider, like, should we ask them what accommodations they need? Should we have a checklist of options of accommodations so that it's not awkward if they say, hey, I need this, and we're like, oh, well, can't do that. And having somebody who already was an expert in that area to rely on was really, really helpful. The city of Norfolk is fortunate in that we have a DEI department as part of our city. And one of the pieces of advice that they gave us was the thing people like the most is hearing themselves talk. So if you ask an organization that specializes in any area you're looking to create accessibility opportunities for, they will probably be happy to help you. And that has certainly been our experience. And we've been very grateful for the folks who have offered their feedback freely, and glad that we had the opportunity to learn from those folks before we made any significant omissions with our efforts.
Thank you, Alison.
I also kind of want to piggyback on that. Is it a piggyback? Maybe not. But we actually didn't. So we always looked at different ways that we can include different groups. So we had memory care come in and created, events for them or tasks that they can work on. But I also would encourage everybody to consider how you can use your volunteers to help you be more accessible. And if you were to look up the definition or look up more information about accessibility and inclusivity, you would also find things like language barriers are a key component of accessibility. And I don't know, for us, we were in a very diverse Waco, Texas, had Baylor, and so we had people from literally, I think, almost every other country. And they would want to volunteer with us. And some of them just didn't have time to do it on site. So we actually created, we used the volunteers to help us with translating a lot of things. So we would have people come in that spoke languages that I may have I didn't even know it was a language, didn't know it existed. And we would reach out to our volunteers and be like, hey, does anybody speak this particular language? And that one, that is a very easy way for our volunteers to help us do something that we might not be able to do. And they loved being a part of that, being able to, one, it's their culture that they are providing this access to the work that we're doing. And so they love being a part of that. So I would also encourage you to also kind of think outside the box and find ways for your volunteers to, when you're looking at how can I create these or have these events or have these tasks that our volunteers can do that might have a disability, try to look at some ways that your volunteers can help you create more accessibility and inclusivity in your workplace.
Any others want to answer that question from the panel? About
I just want to give kudos to the other panelists who both mentioned like involving the audience that you're trying to reach in creating the programs and creating the experience. And I think that that's just a good reminder for everyone. And kind of to the point, you know, that we talked about at the beginning, like it may not be that anyone who identifies that way or speaks that language wants to get involved, and they don't have to. It's not about forcing people to, you know, be the representative, but inviting folks who do want to, who might feel passionate about that and who are going to have a lived experience they can share with you is really going, I think, improve anything that you could do just, you know, reading about it or coming at it from a perspective where you don't have that experience. So glad they mentioned that.
Yeah, and I want to tip my hat to Reagan as well, because I think language accessibility is something that a lot of folks don't necessarily think about when you look at accessibility. When we got started in evaluating our programs, we downloaded a checklist from the ADA that was focused on accessible physical spaces. And so that challenged us to look at the width of our hallways and how our doors opened and where our parking was. But because it's catered more toward populations who have physical restrictions and how they access our spaces, we didn't really think about language for some time, and that impacted how a really significant portion of our population interacted with our services. And it also was the easiest one for us to check off the list because our city has translation services available. So it was something as simple as asking another department. So if you are in an organization that is part of a municipality or that might have access to the services, or like she very cleverly did, can involve your volunteers, that's a really good step in the doorway of accessibility, is focusing on what of your written materials or where on your website you can create more opportunities for folks to use your media.
That's actually a great segue into another question, specifically about in what ways or what have you done to provide resources and services in multiple languages, and just and beyond just the language resources, but specifically the language resources, what other tools and resources and practices would you specifically recommend? So have you done anything to increase access to services in multiple languages? And what other tools and resources would you recommend?
I would like to recommend a couple of things for everybody. So if you, most of us, if you're in animal welfare, I guarantee you have a Canva account. I know for a fact you do. Canva does offer, Canva does offer translation, like a translation tool that you can use. It can create, I've created flyers in Mandarin and in Spanish. Do I speak those languages? No. I definitely have some people review it with you, but if you have Canva, and I know you do, utilize that tool. And then Google Docs does also have a tool for you to translate whatever document that you have written up into certain languages. I don't think it has access to all languages, but a lot of core languages. and I think some dialects as well. So as far as tools go, look at what you already have and do your research on your tools. Some people aren't super techy like me. I'm a total nerd. I research every tool that I use. But look up, you have access, a lot of the tools that you have already have access to translation services. So I say definitely contact your IT department if you are if you have one. If not, do a lot of Googling, do a lot of research, because I don't think you need to go and buy another tool or add another software to your list when I'm 97% sure your software tools already have those services for you.
And just to follow up, I know others are going to jump in here, but Yvonne asks, is there an extension or an app for photo and video alt text? So you might know of any resources like that, Reagan or anyone else?
I want to know that resource. So if anyone does, put it in the chat and tell us.
I do know that YouTube has recently released their AI generated closed captions that can then be translated into whatever language you're looking at. So I think that is one if you do utilize YouTube as a source. And I want to say I have seen Loom have that as well. So if you have not looked into Loom, Loom is a lot similar to Zoom. And it allows you to create videos and include closed captioning. And I want to say that they also have a translation tool as well, but I'm sure there's more if anybody else knows.
Maribel in the chat says she uses CapCut for video editing, and they have an alt text function. And so, back to our panel to continue answering this question.
Two tools that I would recommend are an iSpeak handout. It's a handout that you can download online, and it has a whole bunch of different flags, languages identified in that language so that folks can indicate to you what language they speak if it's not English, and if it's not a language that the person they're interacting with can immediately identify. I'm the only person at my shelter who speaks Spanish, and I've been asked to speak to a few folks who also don't speak Spanish in Spanish. So having an option for folks to correctly identify what language they need assistance in is really helpful. And then we recently ordered, but don't have them yet, so I can't give a review, a double-sided translation tablet. You can find them on Amazon. There are a few companies that make them, and they range in price from a couple $100s to about $2,500, but it works very similarly to a Google Translate. They have about 150 languages, and you can type on one panel and the other person can see the translation pop up in front of them. So it eliminates that awkward back and forth with like someone's phone using Google Translate. So that's another tool that I would recommend having on hand if you do a lot of customer service with individuals who speak different languages. Oh, and picture menus if you are really pressed.
Thank you, Alison.
Point and talk cards, those picture menus are fantastic. They're great, little on the fly, I really need to talk to you right now, tools.
Anyone else want to talk or speak to resources or tools, and specifically any language tools? So talk to us a little bit about what barriers have you encountered doing this work, and how have you worked to address them? Barriers. I know, so everyone should be able to speak on this one. Because I know that that's probably something that's common among all of our panelists, that you have encountered some barriers.
Time, money, the barriers to everything. You know, some of the projects that you'll need to do to become accessible are going to take more money and more time than you might think that you have available. I love hearing all of these great, you know, low cost and free resources that can help you do this work. Volunteers are another fantastic resource who can help you do this work. We were just talking about, like with translation services, we've had volunteers help with that. We've had staff work on that. And the biggest way to overcome those barriers is to prioritize the work. So if it's a priority, then you have more time and more money to spend working toward it. So that's how we've overcome that barrier, is just saying this is a priority for our organization. So that means that we're going to put some staff time and some budget toward this, just like we would any other program or priority. And I know that that can be easier said than done for some organizations, but really it's about prioritizing doing the work, and then you find the resources.
For us, similarly, biggest obstacles, I would put money first and then time. We are in a leased space, so we don't have the flexibility to make modifications to our building, and we don't have a lot of extra money to do it. But the cool thing about shelter people is that they're really scrappy and they can find a way around most obstacles. For example, one of the ADA's requirements is that you have to have a handicap accessible entrance within a certain distance, or you have to have signs that indicate where that handicap accessible space is. And for us, it means going all the way around our building into our back lot. So not very convenient, but it is at least a step above not having anything at all. And in sheltering, and especially in municipal sheltering, I often find that doing something is still better than doing nothing. So doing an imperfect version of the work to make your space more accessible is still better than saying, oh, well, I don't have any time and any money, so I'll just wait. Because those folks are still out there and they still need to be able to use your services.
I'm going to go to a super basic example, but I'm going to go in the direction of barriers when you're just trying to connect with your community, and the barriers that some folks with disability might face when they're trying to adopt a pet from you. So I'm someone that's living with MS, multiple sclerosis. I'm pretty open about this, and I like to talk about it for awareness and all of that. But I'm in an online support forum on Reddit, and I wrote a post. I read a post that broke my heart. So one individual wrote that they were trying to adopt a Rottie poodle, which I didn't know was a thing until I read this post. That's a new one for me. So they were trying to adopt from a rescue group, and through the application process, they did not disclose that they were living with MS, but the rescue group Googled that individual and found an article that he wrote for general awareness and around life changes that come after you've been diagnosed with MS. So the rescue group Googled and just flat out denied the application and told the individual by phone. There was no other reason given, and their decision was based on their MS diagnosis. No conversation about how to set this person up for success, which also they had 2 other adults in the home, by the way, to help them. But they just denied them because they assumed that the individual may not be able to care for their dog that they were looking to adopt with the disability they were living with. And I think just starting with the basics and looking at how you're processing your adoptions could be huge. And maybe rather than Googling folks and then making some assumptions, please just talk to us. And trust us when we tell you our lived experiences. We're not stupid. We know our limitations. I think about my limitations constantly, and I'm always preparing for them and trying to set myself up for success. And I don't want to speak for everyone, but we're adults here and we can make the best decisions for our life. So having conversations and try to approach things with an open mind and a solution-based mindset and help make a good match for the person that's looking for a companion. Because my pets have been very important to me with facing this. So just going back to basics and looking to see how you can include more folks and not be discriminatory.
Thank you, Kristan.
I want to kind of couple what I'm saying with what Kristan's saying. As a person who has what would be described as a disability, I personally don't see it as a disability, but I am clinically diagnosed with attention deficit disorder with the hyperactivity variable. That's the fancy way of saying I have ADHD. I have gone through all the testing and was clinically diagnosed by a doctor as ADHD. And I struggled a lot. And somebody in the chat had pointed out that a lot of disabilities are not visible. Mine is a cognitive disability. It is a neurodevelopment disability. So it is just that my brain did not develop on the normal routes that most people's would. And I have found my biggest barrier as an employee, as somebody who worked in animal welfare, was that it was hard to get others to understand what I needed. Again, what Kristan was saying about assumptions, people just assumed things about me. That one, I didn't enjoy my work. I was lazy. I didn't want to do the hard things. When in reality, I had a hard time telling people that I needed their instructions written down. I don't absorb verbal instructions at all. Like, really, you can tell me something and within about a minute or two, it's gone. I have no short-term memory. And I think if you are hiring people, if you are posting for somebody to come and work for you, it's important to empower them to talk to you, and then you need to equip yourself with the tools to listen. And then also, I always call it a toolkit. Have people work on building their toolkit. So I have a toolkit now, my personal toolkit. And it doesn't necessarily mean software or a device, a tangible device. Mine is, a lot of time when I talk to my manager, it's the best thing. I love her to death. She is amazing. I tell her every time that can you please write that down? I ask her for feedback. I ask her for deadlines, because time management, if you have ADHD, you know that is not one of our top skills. And I also have a language for myself when I need to be upfront with people that if I'm working on a project with you, you should know this is my communication style. And I ask that you please help me understand you by maybe writing it down or, having these conversations. So that, as an employee, my biggest barrier tended to be the people I was working with. So empower yourself to, one, be open to hearing what people are saying when they're trying to communicate their needs to you. And then go through training or get feedback from others to learn how to ask the right questions. I'm extremely open. It's a blessing and a curse. And but not everybody is like that. So that is my personal barrier, and I can't be the only person. I know for a fact that there are other people that have had the similar barriers. So
I'm so
Thank
glad
you.
you brought that up, because my illness is invisible. So MS is like a progressive neurological disease, but I do not use mobility devices at this time. So I just look like a normal person. So I'm glad you brought that up, because there's also dynamic disabilities. And if you're not sure what that is, dynamic disability means when, like, one day you're doing all the things, like I feel like I can accomplish anything. I'm feeling motivated. I can reach all of my career goals in 1 week, and I'm traveling. But then maybe the next minute or the next day, like I'm just flat out on the couch with fatigue for days on end. But I still want to be like invited to the things and asked to do the things. So still extend invitations. And then like I can make that decision if I'm able to participate or if I need to bow out. And I'm going to use a quick example. If you remember, I don't know, this was like a million years ago on social media now, but do you guys remember Noodles the pug? He was famous for like his dad would ask if it was a bone stay or a no bone stay. So it's like a good example for dynamic disability. Like he would pick Noodle up, it was a pug, old pug. You would pick him up off his dog bag to see if he was going to stand up or like flop back down dramatically. Because some days when you wake up, you just gotta lay back down when you have dynamic disability. But if Noodle stood up, it was like a bone stay. And if he went back to sleep or flopped over, he was just without bones that day. So I think that's a good way to explain dynamic disability. It is okay to have a no bone stay because sometimes you just need to give yourself the time to rest and practice self-care in our very crazy field of animal welfare.
Thank you so much, Chris.
I'd like to tag on. I also want to thank Reagan and Kristan for sharing their experiences. For me, my disability is in how I process things. I am dyslexic, and being in a role where I'm providing stats and data, it is, for me, being open about dyslexia is an explanation and not an excuse. And for me, it manifests itself a lot with transposing letters or words, or even how I associate words. So I might be working in two systems, and I, in my mind, might mean to say one system, but I'll say another system. And so being open with people and having that space for grace where I do know how to read, I am literate, but it's hard for me to sometimes read something and then be able to pronounce it. So I might ask someone, I'm sorry, can you please tell me how to pronounce your name? Or I might ask, how is that pronounced? And I might have to ask that a couple of times. And then it does take me a little bit longer sometimes to read things. For me, that's where the auditory comes in, and why I'm such a big fan of text to speech. And sometimes with some of the apps, many of them, it highlights the words so I can also get that visual. And I really try to take my experiences and understand that I don't know what's going on with other people in their lives and what they're going through on a given day, and really try not to make assumptions and just, try to be aware of where they are right now.
Thank you so much, Joyce. And we're at the 1 minute mark, and I know Caitlin is going to jump back on with the survey at this time, but I certainly want to thank all of our panelists for joining us for this robust and very necessary conversation. And I know that there were so many more questions that we weren't able to ask or to get to. And so so I hope you've placed those questions and answers in the Q&A, and we will circle back and get to those. I just want to lean into my DEIB hat and say it also sounds like one barrier is bias. And we need to continue to have ongoing training for our staff, for our people, to make sure that they are aware of those biases and they check those biases so they aren't making these assumptions and discriminating against people because of that bias.
Thank you all so much for being here. Even more than usual, I want to thank our panelists for being so kind and transparent, and I feel very confident that you've initiated a conversation that will have real impacts on people and pets. So I want to express that appreciation. And I also want to express that appreciation again to anyone watching the recording or attending live. It is no small thing to take time out of your day to come to something like this. So I deeply appreciate you and the work that you are doing as well. That poll is up. We'd really appreciate you filling that out. But otherwise, thank you all and have an excellent evening.